Her black mom texted the CEO by mistake, asking for money to feed her baby. The storm hammered against the thin windows of Alicia Moore's one-bedroom apartment, each raindrop a tiny fist demanding entry. But it wasn't the thunder that kept her awake at 2:37 a.m. It was 4-month-old Elijah's weak cries coming from the second-hand crib in the corner. "Sure, baby, I know," Alicia whispered, her voice cracking as she lifted her son. His tiny body felt lighter than last week, his brown eyes sunken and dull beneath heavy lids. The pediatrician's words from yesterday's free clinic visit echoed in her mind. "His weight has dropped again. Ms. Moore, are you diluting his formula?" She hadn't been able to meet the doctor's eyes. What could she say? That 1 can of formula had to last 5 days instead of 2? That after her husband Marcus died in that warehouse accident 2 years ago, the company had somehow classified him as a temporary contractor, despite his 3 years of service, leaving her with nothing, no insurance, no settlement, not even his final paycheck? The guilt sat like a stone in her throat as she rocked Elijah. "Mama's going to do better," she promised. But how? Her janitorial night shift at Pinnacle Industries barely covered rent. The refrigerator held nothing but a half-empty bottle of formula, watered down to a pale shadow of what it should be. Alicia's phone, an ancient model with a cracked screen, showed 3 unread texts from her landlord about the late rent. Beside it lay her hospital bill from when Elijah developed that first stomach infection from the diluted formula. The column of numbers blurred as tears welled in her eyes. "I can't do this anymore," she whispered to no one. 6 hours later, Alicia shuffled through the service entrance of Pinnacle Industries' gleaming headquarters. The contrast between her life and this building had never felt sharper. Polished marble floors versus her apartment's peeling linoleum, designer furniture versus her salvaged thrift store couch. She changed into her gray uniform in the small janitor's closet that doubled as a break room, her movements mechanical after 8 months on the job. As she tied her hair back, Elijah's hollow-eyed face haunted her. She'd left him with Mrs. Gaines next door, the elderly woman who watched him for a discounted rate because she'd been fond of Marcus. But Mrs. Gaines had hinted she couldn't keep helping forever. "Morning, Alicia. You look half dead, girl." Darlene, the day shift supervisor, stood in the doorway, concern etched across her weathered face. "I'm fine," Alicia replied automatically. The lie tasted bitter. "You ain't fine. Nobody's fine working 2 jobs on no sleep." Darlene lowered her voice. "Security's doing random checks on break times this week. Watch yourself." Alicia nodded gratefully. Another write-up would mean termination, and she couldn't afford to lose this job, not when Elijah's health hung by a thread. While cleaning the executive floor's break room, a space larger than her entire apartment, Alicia's attention caught on something in the recycling bin. A discarded employee directory, its glossy cover emblazoned with Pinnacle's logo. She hesitated only briefly before slipping it into her cart. Maybe there was someone, anyone, who could help. That night, after her shift ended at midnight, Alicia sat on her bed with the stolen directory spread before her. Elijah had finally fallen asleep after crying for hours. The formula was gone. Tomorrow was payday, but the money was already assigned to bills that couldn't wait. Her finger traced down the list of names, stopping suddenly at a familiar one. James C. Last spring, a kind maintenance worker named James had helped her when she'd gotten lost in the maze-like building during her first week. He'd shown her a shortcut and even snuck her a sandwich from the executive dining room when he heard her stomach growling. There were several James C's in the directory. She picked the one that sounded right. James Carlton, Executive Offices. With trembling fingers, Alicia typed out a message. "James, it's Alicia Moore from Night Cleaning. I don't know if you remember me. I'm sorry to ask this. My baby is sick from watered formula, and I have nothing left until payday. Could you possibly loan me $40 for formula and baby food? Or maybe bring leftovers from the cafeteria tomorrow? I promise I'll pay you back when I get paid. I wouldn't ask if I had anywhere else to turn." She hit send before she could reconsider, then placed the phone face down, a tear sliding onto Elijah's blanket. The humiliation burned, but pride wouldn't feed her son. Miles away, in a penthouse overlooking the city skyline, James Carlton's phone buzzed. The 47-year-old CEO of Pinnacle Industries frowned at the unknown number. He rarely gave out his personal contact information, and it was well past business hours. The message popped up on his screen. He read it once. Twice. His finger hovered over. Delete. The automatic response to what must be a mistake or scam. But something stopped him. Perhaps it was the raw desperation in the words. Perhaps it was the mention of the cafeteria, not something a random scammer would know. Or perhaps it was simply that in 15 years of running Pinnacle, he couldn't remember the last time anyone had spoken to him with such unvarnished honesty. Instead of deleting the message, James Carlton, who hadn't set foot in his company's lower floors in over 5 years, did something unexpected. He wrote back. "How much formula do you need?" James Carlton's reflection stared back at him from the window of his penthouse, the city lights below blurring as he focused on the phone in his hand. He'd sent the message 20 minutes ago. No response yet. He took another sip of 18-year-old scotch, swirling the amber liquid. Why had he responded? The message was clearly meant for someone else, probably a maintenance worker or cafeteria staff. Yet something in the woman's words had pierced through the armor of indifference he'd spent years cultivating. His phone buzzed. "Mr. Carlton? Oh my God, I'm so sorry. I thought you were someone else. Please forgive me. I'll never bother you again." James frowned. The panic in her response bothered him. Was this woman, Alicia, so afraid of accidentally messaging the CEO that she'd rather continue diluting her baby's formula than accept help? "It's not a problem," he typed. "I asked how much formula you need. And I'd like to know if you work for Pinnacle directly or through a contractor." 3 dots appeared, disappeared, appeared again. Finally. "His formula is $32 per can. We need 2. I work through Clean Sweep Services. They handle all janitorial for Pinnacle. I'm so sorry about this mistake. Please don't tell my supervisor." James moved to the sleek glass desk that dominated one corner of his living room. With a few keystrokes, he accessed Pinnacle's employee database. Clean Sweep Services. Of course. Like many corporations, Pinnacle outsourced non-essential services like cleaning, security, and food service. It lowered overhead costs and eliminated the need for benefits. He narrowed his search. More Alicia. Her employee file appeared, barren compared to the comprehensive records of Pinnacle's direct employees. No medical benefits. No emergency assistance record. Just an ID number, schedule, and security clearance level. James leaned back, suddenly restless. When had he last spoken with any employee below the executive level? He couldn't remember. The days blurred together, board meetings, investor calls, charity galas where he wrote checks without thought while barely tasting overpriced meals. A surge of curiosity overcame him. Who was this woman who had accidentally stumbled into his digital life? Did she represent a bigger problem within his company's structure? The next morning, instead of his usual town car, James drove himself to Pinnacle headquarters. Instead of his tailored suit, he wore jeans and a plain button-down. Rather than entering through the executive elevator, he walked through the service entrance for the first time in over a decade. "ID?" asked the security guard without looking up. James handed over a visitor badge he'd arranged earlier. "Facilities inspection," he said, lowering his voice. The guard waved him through without a second glance. The basement level was a different world from the gleaming upper floors. Concrete walls. Fluorescent lighting that buzzed and flickered. Supply closets, break rooms barely larger than storage spaces. James moved through these areas unrecognized, observing. In the early afternoon, he positioned himself in a corner of the employee cafeteria with a coffee and a newspaper. His eyes scanned the room until he spotted her, a slight woman in gray uniform, hair pulled back tightly, dark circles under her eyes. She matched the employee photo. Alicia Moore. He watched as she collected dirty trays, keeping her head down. Once, she glanced around furtively before slipping an untouched apple and half a sandwich into her pocket. The movement was so practiced, so careful, that James doubted anyone else had noticed. Later, he followed her at a distance, watching her clean methodically, efficiently, moving faster than the other custodial staff. She took no breaks. When the cafeteria closed, he observed her checking trash bins near the kitchen, occasionally retrieving still-wrapped food items. Something cold settled in James's stomach. This wasn't laziness or entitlement, as board members often characterized lower-wage workers. This was survival. Back in his office, James called his assistant. "Get me all the contracts with Clean Sweep Services. And find out if we've had any workplace accidents in the last 3 years involving their employees." "Any specific reason, sir?" his assistant asked. "Just curious about our operational liabilities," he replied, the corporate speak flowing easily. The reports arrived an hour later. James pored over them, his expression darkening. Clean Sweep employees worked Pinnacle hours, followed Pinnacle protocols, and were even identified as Pinnacle staff to visitors. Yet they received none of the benefits, protections, or advancement opportunities. The accident report was buried in the third folder. Marcus Moore, 27. Fatal fall in Warehouse Section B. Classified as a contract worker incident, despite 3 years of service. Case closed with minimal investigation. James sat back, mind racing. Alicia hadn't just randomly texted him. She was the widow of a man who died working for his company. A company that had used contractual technicalities to avoid responsibility. His phone buzzed with a reminder about tomorrow's board meeting, an agenda item about reducing operational costs further. James Carlton had built his fortune on being dispassionate, on making decisions based on numbers rather than emotions. Yet as night fell over the city, for the first time in years, he couldn't shake the feeling that something fundamental was broken in the empire he built. He picked up his phone and typed a message to an unknown number. "The formula and some groceries will be delivered to your address tomorrow morning. No repayment needed." This time, he didn't wait for a response before beginning to formulate a plan. James entered Pinnacle's Human Resources Department at precisely 9:17 a.m. He'd chosen the time carefully, late enough that the morning rush would be over, early enough that lunch preparations hadn't begun. He wore his incognito outfit again, jeans, button-down shirt, visitor badge clipped to his belt. Marla Benson's office door stood open. The HR director was a formidable presence at Pinnacle, having outlasted 3 CEOs before James. Her reputation for cutting costs while maintaining technical compliance with labor laws was legendary in corporate circles. James had interacted with her only in budget meetings and performance reviews. Today, he wanted to see the real Marla, the one employees encountered when asking for help. He knocked lightly on the doorframe. "Excuse me?" Marla looked up, irritation flashing across her face before settling into a practiced smile. "Can I help you?" Her gaze flicked to his visitor badge. "I hope so," James said, adopting a slightly nervous tone. "I'm with the facilities audit team. We're reviewing employee support systems. You should have scheduled an appointment," Marla replied, already turning back to her computer. "Just a few quick questions," James pressed. "About the emergency assistance programs for staff, particularly custodial and maintenance workers." Marla's perfectly manicured nails paused over her keyboard. "Those aren't Pinnacle employees. They're contracted through external services. But they work here full-time, right?" James persisted. "Do they have access to the emergency fund? Or the healthcare clinic?" A tight smile stretched across Marla's face. "They have whatever benefits their actual employers provide. Which isn't our concern." "What about workplace accident compensation?" James asked, thinking of Marcus Moore. At this, Marla leaned back and regarded him with newfound suspicion. "Who did you say you were with again?" James deflected. "I'm curious about the distinction between employees and contractors when they're essentially performing the same functions." Something hardened in Marla's expression, a glimpse behind the corporate mask. "Look, whoever you are, let me explain something. Those people are not our responsibility. They're a line item: janitorial services, security services, food services. That's why we contract them out. But, do you have any idea? Marla continued, lowering her voice conspiratorially. How much money I've saved this company by structuring things this way? Millions. No benefits, no insurance liabilities, no messy emotional situations. When there's a problem, we call their company, not deal with it ourselves. She tapped her desk sharply. That's efficiency. What about when they get hurt? Or can't feed their families? James asked, his disguise slipping slightly. Marla's eyes narrowed. Then they should get better jobs. Not everyone is entitled to a corporate cushion. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have actual work to do. James nodded stiffly and left, bow rising in his throat. He'd known, abstractly, the rationale behind contract workers. He'd approved the policies years ago. But hearing it laid out so coldly, when he could still see Alicia's exhausted face and her baby's hollow eyes, made him physically ill. That evening, in the privacy of his office, James accessed the secure server where Pinnacle's contracts were stored. He bypassed security using his executive credentials, then methodically examined every agreement with Clean Sweep Services from the past 5 years. What he found confirmed his suspicions. The contract workers weren't just performing similar functions to employees. Their contracts actually specified Pinnacle uniforms, Pinnacle training procedures, and Pinnacle supervision. They were, for all practical purposes, Pinnacle employees, except when it came to benefits, protections, and advancement opportunities. The most damning evidence came in a memo attached to the most recent contract renewal. In it, Marla had specifically noted, maintaining technical separation while exercising full control. Structure ensures minimal liability exposure while maximizing worker output. James leaned back, anger pulsing through him. The system had not evolved by accident. It had been engineered specifically to extract maximum work while providing minimum support. And he had signed off on it all, focused on the bottom line, blind to the human cost. His phone buzzed with a new message, Alicia, responding to his delivery of formula and groceries. Mr. Carlton, I don't know how to thank you. Elijah is already looking better. I promise I'll repay every cent as soon as I can. Before he could respond, a second message appeared. I just realized, you might not know this, but my husband Marcus used to work at Pinnacle too. He died there 2 years ago. They said because he was contracted through Staff Right Services, they weren't responsible for death benefits. If he'd been a regular employee, Elijah and I would have been taken care of. I know it's not your fault. I just needed someone to know. James stared at the message for a long time. Then he picked up his desk phone and called his executive assistant. Schedule a company-wide town hall for next Monday, he said, his voice steady and cold. Mandatory attendance. All departments. And, he paused, make sure it includes all contract workers. Every single one. Sir? His assistant sounded confused. That's not standard protocol for. I'm aware. James cut her off. Do it anyway. The wheels of change, rusty from disuse, had begun to turn. Dawn had barely broken when the unmarked delivery van pulled up outside Alicia's apartment building. The driver, paid handsomely for discretion, carried 3 large boxes up the crumbling concrete steps. He checked the address twice before knocking softly. Inside, Alicia jolted awake. Elijah had been up 3 times during the night, but at least he'd taken a full bottle each time. The formula James Carlton had sent was already making a difference. She opened the door cautiously, clutching her threadbare robe closed. Delivery for Alicia Moore, the man said, extending a clipboard. Sign here, please. Confused, Alicia scribbled her signature and watched as he stacked the boxes inside her tiny entryway. Once he left, she knelt to examine them. The first contained more baby formula, not just 2 cans, but 12. Premium brand. The second held diapers, baby clothes in larger sizes, and a soft blue blanket that made her throat tight with emotion. The third box contained groceries, fresh fruit, vegetables, bread, pasta, even some chicken and beef sealed in individual portions for her freezer. At the bottom of this box, she found a sealed envelope. Inside was a prepaid debit card with a handwritten note. $2,000 for essentials. No repayment needed. Alicia sank to the floor, overwhelmed. The amount represented nearly 3 months of her salary. With trembling hands, she reached for her phone. "Mr. Carlton, I don't know what to say. This is too much. I can't accept all this." The response came almost immediately. "It's not charity, Alicia. It's fixing something that should never have been broken. Your husband worked for my company for 3 years. This doesn't begin to address that wrong." Tears blurred her vision. She never expected the CEO to acknowledge Marcus, let alone connect his death to her current struggles. "Thank you," she typed simply. "Elijah took a full bottle last night. No dilution. He slept better than he has in weeks." She hesitated, then sent another message. "I promise to pay it forward somehow when I'm back on my feet. I won't forget this kindness." James, sitting in his car in the Pinnacle parking garage, read her messages with an unexpected lump in his throat. The small gesture had cost him nothing, the equivalent of a business dinner he wouldn't have remembered the next day. Yet clearly, it meant everything to her. "No repayment needed," he wrote back. "Just keep going." He set his phone down and was about to exit his car when it buzzed again. Another message from Alicia. "I don't know if I should tell you this, but I feel like you actually care. When Marcus died, the company said there would be an investigation. There wasn't. His supervisor told me Marcus had removed his safety harness to reach a jammed loading belt. That wasn't true. Marcus was religious about safety protocols because of me and the baby coming. I tried to speak to someone about it, but the HR department said since he was contracted through Staffright, I needed to take it up with them. Staffright said since the accident happened on Pinnacle property, they had no jurisdiction. I got shuffled back and forth until I ran out of energy to fight." James felt the blood drain from his face. He'd never heard about a disputed accident report. Had it been deliberately buried? His phone buzzed again. "Marcus's coworker, Devin, tried to back up my story. 2 weeks later, he was fired for unrelated performance issues. After that, no one would talk to me. The only reason I even got the job at Clean Sweep was because my cousin already worked there. I just wanted you to know, the system doesn't just fail people when they're down. Sometimes it pushes them down first." James sat motionless, her words burning into his consciousness. His company, his responsibility, had not just failed to help this woman after tragedy. It had actively worked to silence the truth about her husband's death. He typed carefully. "Alicia, I need you to tell me everything you remember about that day. And I need Devin's full name." What followed was a detailed account that contradicted every official report in Pinnacle's files. Marcus had indeed been wearing his safety equipment. The accident had occurred because the warehouse section was operating with outdated safety rails that had been flagged for replacement months earlier, a capital expense that had been repeatedly deferred to improve quarterly earnings. The picture emerging was damning. Not just negligence, but a deliberate cover-up. And the trail of accountability led directly to the executive floor, to the budget approvals James himself had signed. That afternoon, James called an emergency meeting with his legal team, deliberately excluding Marla Benson. "I want a complete review of all workplace incidents involving contract employees over the past 5 years," he instructed. "And I want settlement packages drawn up for any cases where our liability was obscured by contractual technicalities." The lawyers exchanged nervous glances. "Sir, that could expose the company to significant..." "I'm aware of the financial implications," James cut in. "I'm more concerned with the human ones." As the lawyers filed out, James pulled up the company-wide email system. The town hall meeting was still 3 days away, but he couldn't wait that long to begin taking action. Not when he now understood the full extent of the injustice Alicia and others like her had suffered. His fingers hesitated over the keyboard. Any major policy change would face fierce resistance from the board. Marla and her allies would fight to maintain the status quo. But the system he'd helped create had crushed people like Alicia and Marcus, people who had given their labor, their time, even their lives to Pinnacle Industries, only to be discarded as external resources when they needed help most. James began to type, drafting the announcement that would forever change Pinnacle's relationship with its workers, all its workers. As he wrote, a plan formed for the town hall meeting that would bring Alicia face to face with the company that had wronged her, in a way neither she nor Marla Benson would ever expect. The atrium of Pinnacle Industries headquarters had never been so crowded. Executives in tailored suits stood awkwardly beside maintenance workers in blue coveralls. Cafeteria staff hovered near the edges, while accounting teams clustered together, whispering about the unprecedented gathering. In the front row, Marla Benson checked her watch repeatedly, her perfectly styled hair catching the light as she shifted impatiently. Beside her, other department heads speculated about the purpose of this mandatory all-staff meeting. Probably another restructuring announcement, one VP whispered. The Q3 numbers were soft. My money's on a merger, another replied. The stock's been undervalued for months. Near the back, Alicia Moore stood nervously, feeling conspicuously out of place in her gray clean sweep uniform. The text message she'd received yesterday had been confusing. Please attend tomorrow's town hall meeting. Your presence is important. It had come from James Carlton's number, but she couldn't imagine why the CEO would want her there. Mrs. Gaines had agreed to watch Elijah, who, thanks to proper nutrition, was finally gaining weight and smiling more. Alicia still couldn't believe the generosity that had transformed her kitchen from empty to abundantly stocked. She felt both grateful and uneasy. What did the CEO want in return? At precisely 10 a.m., the lights dimmed slightly. The massive screens flanking the stage remained dark. A hush fell over the crowd as a single figure walked onto the stage without introduction. Good morning, said James Carlton, his voice amplified through the sound system. Thank you all for coming. He wore no tie with his crisp white shirt and dark suit. His usual polished CEO demeanor seemed different somehow, more present, more human. Many of you have never seen me in person before, he continued. Some of you have worked in this building for years without ever crossing paths with me. That ends today. Confused murmurs rippled through the crowd. Last week, something extraordinary happened. I received a text message from someone who works in this building, someone who needed help feeding her baby because we weren't paying her enough to live on. Alicia froze, her heart hammering against her ribs. He couldn't possibly be talking about her. She thought she was texting a maintenance worker who had once shown her kindness. Instead, she reached me, the CEO who had created and perpetuated the very system that was causing her to suffer. The room had gone completely silent. Even Marla Benson had stopped fidgeting. This woman cleans our offices every night. She works hard. She follows every rule. And yet she was forced to water down her baby's formula because she couldn't afford to buy enough. Why? Because we deliberately classified her as a contract worker instead of an employee, denying her the benefits, protections, and fair wages she deserves. James's gaze swept the room, settling briefly on Alicia before moving to the executive row. But it gets worse. 2 years ago, her husband died in an accident in our warehouse. An accident caused by safety equipment we knew needed replacing but didn't replace because it would have affected our quarterly earnings. And then, we denied her any compensation or support because, again, he was technically a contract worker, not a Pinnacle employee. Gasps and whispers spread through the assembly. Marla Benson's face had drained of color. I've spent the past week investigating how widespread this practice is. What I've found sickens me. James gestured, and the screens behind him illuminated with graphs and figures. 43% of the people who work in this building every day are classified as external contractors. They wear our uniforms. They follow our rules. They represent our company to the world. But when they need help, they're told they're not really our people. He paused, letting the information sink in. Effective immediately, that changes. All contract workers who have been with us for more than 6 months will be offered full employee status, with all associated benefits, healthcare, and protections. We will establish a retroactive compensation fund for workplace accidents involving contract staff, starting with the family of Marcus Moore. At the mention of her husband's name, Alicia's hand flew to her mouth. Tears spilled down her cheeks. Additionally, I've accepted the resignation of our HR director, Marla Benson, effective immediately. Marla shot to her feet. You can't do this. The board will never. The board has already approved these changes. James cut her off smoothly. After reviewing your memo stating how we maintain technical separation while exercising full control to ensure minimal liability exposure, they agreed that our current practices expose us to far greater legal and ethical liabilities than these changes. The crowd erupted in a mix of applause, shocked conversations, and emotional outbursts. James raised his hands for quiet. But there's someone here who deserves a personal apology. His eyes found Alicia in the crowd. Alicia Moore, would you please come forward? A spotlight swung to illuminate her. Alicia stood frozen, shocked at hearing her name from the CEO's lips. The crowd parted as she slowly, hesitantly made her way to the stage. When she reached James, he extended his hand. She took it, trembling. Ms. Moore, on behalf of Pinnacle Industries, I offer you our deepest apology for the loss of your husband and for the shameful way you've been treated. Your accidental message woke me up to what we've become. One text made me realize what we've ignored, and I intend to fix it. The murmurs in the crowd grew louder as recognition dawned. This custodial worker had somehow prompted this enormous corporate shift. Starting today, James continued, still holding Alicia's hand, Ms. Moore will join our Human Resources Department as our first employee advocacy coordinator, helping to rebuild our support systems from the ground up. Her first-hand experience with our failures makes her uniquely qualified to help us do better. Alicia stared at him in disbelief. Mr. Carlton, I don't have the qualifications. You have exactly the qualifications we need, James replied, loud enough for everyone to hear. You know what it's like when the system fails. That's expertise we desperately need. As applause erupted again, Marla Benson stormed toward the exit, followed by nervous glances from her team. But most eyes remained fixed on the unlikely pair on stage, the CEO and the custodian, united by a text message that had accidentally changed everything. For the first time in years, James Carlton felt something that had been missing from his corner office and executive meetings, a sense of purpose. And for the first time since Marcus died, Alicia Moore felt something she'd almost forgotten: hope. 6 months later, Alicia Moore stood before the newly installed memorial plaque in Pinnacle's main lobby. In memory of Marcus Moore and all workers who have given their lives in service to this company, read the inscription. Beneath it, a promise. We honor their sacrifice by creating a safer workplace for all. She adjusted her blazer, still feeling slightly uncomfortable in business attire after years in a cleaner's uniform, and touched the plaque gently. Sometimes it still felt like a dream, how drastically her life had changed since that desperate night when she'd sent a text message to the wrong James C. Mommy, look! Elijah's voice pulled her attention away from the memorial. At 18 months old, he was thriving, chubby-cheeked and curious, pointing excitedly at the fountain in the center of the lobby. Mrs. Gaines, who now worked part-time in Pinnacle's new on-site daycare center, smiled as she held his hand. I see, baby, Alicia called back, smiling at her son's wonder. He'd grown so much these past months, physically and developmentally catching up after those early malnourished days. His health insurance through Pinnacle had covered extensive pediatric visits, nutrition support, and even developmental therapy to address any lingering effects from his difficult start. The quarterly report is ready for review, said a voice behind her. Alicia turned to see Elena, her assistant in the newly created Worker Support Division. Thanks, Elena. I'll look it over after the meeting with James. The name still felt strange on her tongue, calling the CEO by his first name. But he'd insisted, especially after they began working closely together to restructure Pinnacle's approach to worker welfare. Alicia made her way to the executive floor, nodding to familiar faces as she passed. The atmosphere throughout the building had changed over the months. The stark division between real employees and outsourced staff had begun to dissolve, replaced by a growing sense of community. When she reached James's office, she found him not behind his imposing desk but sitting at the round table near the window where they held their weekly meetings. "There she is," James said warmly, standing to greet her. "The woman who changed Pinnacle." Alicia shook her head, still uncomfortable with such praise. "You did that, not me." "No," James replied firmly. "You had the courage to ask for help. I just had the sense to listen." He gestured to the folder on the table. "The latest from the Worker Support Fund. We've processed settlements for 17 families affected by workplace accidents involving contract staff. Devin Williams has been rehired with back pay and a promotion. And the safety upgrades across all facilities are 90% complete." Alicia nodded, pride swelling in her chest. The Worker Support Fund had been her first major initiative, a program that not only addressed past wrongs but created ongoing resources for emergencies, education, childcare subsidies, and health support. "The board's still complaining about the costs?" she asked, knowing the answer. James smiled wryly. "Less each month. It's harder to argue with the results. Workplace accidents down 38%, productivity up 17%, turnover reduced by almost half. Turns out treating people like actual human beings is good business. Who would have thought?" Alicia replied with a hint of sarcasm that would have been unimaginable 6 months ago. James chuckled, then grew serious. "I've been thinking about expanding the program. Industry-wide." "What do you mean?" "Other companies are watching what we're doing. Some are worried we're setting uncomfortable precedents." He leaned forward. "I want to prove this isn't charity or PR. It's a fundamental rethinking of corporate responsibility." He pushed a brochure across the table. Alicia picked it up, reading the title. "The Pinnacle Standards, Corporate Ethics for the Modern Workplace." "We've already had inquiries from 3 major corporations interested in implementing similar programs," James explained. "I'd like you to head the initiative, sharing our model with other companies." Alicia stared at him, momentarily speechless. "Me? But I've only been doing this work for 6 months, yes. But you've lived this reality for years." James's expression was earnest. "That's knowledge no business school can teach. The consultants and executives we've brought in all defer to you, Alicia. You understand this in a way they never will." Later that evening, Alicia entered her new apartment, a spacious 2-bedroom in a safe neighborhood with good schools. Elijah ran ahead of her to his room, filled with books and toys. The settlement from Marcus's death had provided financial security, while her new position offered something equally valuable: the chance to prevent other families from experiencing what she had endured. She placed her briefcase on the kitchen counter and noticed the framed text message she kept as a reminder. She'd printed it out and framed it the day after the town hall meeting. "James, it's Alicia Moore from Night Cleaning. I don't know if you remember me. I'm sorry to ask this. My baby is sick from watered formula, and I have nothing left until payday." Below it, in her own handwriting, she'd added, "The message that changed everything." Her phone buzzed with a text. She smiled when she saw it was from James. "Monthly coffee meeting with floor supervisors went well. 3 new issues identified, solutions already in progress. The maintenance team says thank you for the new break room. See you tomorrow at the board presentation. You'll do great." She typed back, "Thanks. Still nervous about presenting to the board, but I know the numbers support us. Elijah says hi." James had kept his promise to meet regularly with staff from all levels of the company. Once a month, he still wore plain clothes and visited different departments unannounced, listening to concerns directly rather than waiting for them to filter up through management layers. The practice had caught on. Other executives had begun doing the same, creating a culture where problems were addressed before they became crises. What had begun as a desperate plea from a struggling mother had transformed into a movement that was reshaping not just Pinnacle, but potentially the entire industry's approach to worker welfare. Alicia glanced at her phone's contacts list. She never deleted the number labeled simply James C. Hope. That label had seemed aspirational when she first added it, during those dark days when hope felt like a luxury she couldn't afford. Now it seemed prophetic. Through her window, she could see the lights of the city, including the distinctive Pinnacle Tower in the distance. Somewhere in that building, countless workers, now genuine employees with rights and protections, were doing their evening shifts. They wouldn't have to scavenge for food or dilute their children's formula. They wouldn't be abandoned if tragedy struck. One accidental text message. One moment of desperate honesty. One CEO who chose to listen rather than delete. Sometimes the smallest connections changed everything. As she tucked Elijah into bed later that night, he asked for his favorite story, the one about how Mommy's message found its way to the right person. Once upon a time, Elisha began, stroking his curly hair. There was a mommy who was very worried about her little boy. Elijah smiled sleepily, secure in the knowledge that in his story, unlike so many others, things had turned out all right in the end.